My wife dragged me to a land appraisal meeting and told everyone, "Don't ask him anything, he gets confused." She even answered for me, like I was furniture. I leaned on my cane and stayed quiet, until I heard her and her friend switch to Spanish and say one sentence that told me they weren't just taking my money, they were taking my life, like share and subscribe. The ranch sits 15 miles outside town, where the road turns from asphalt to dust and the cell signal drops without warning. That was the first place I noticed things changing. Not all at once. Quietly, like furniture being moved when you're not in the room. Melissa started answering questions that weren't directed at her. At the pharmacy, the clerk would ask me how I was feeling, and she'd step in first. He gets confused in the afternoons. At the bank, they'd slide the papers toward me, and she'd pull them back. "I'll take care of this." She always smiled when she said it. The kind of smile that makes other people relax. Every morning at 7, the pills appeared on the kitchen counter, small white ones, pale blue ones. I asked what they were for. She said the doctor adjusted my dosage. I asked which doctor. She said I didn't remember him because of my condition. The word condition started showing up everywhere, on conversations, on forms, on my life. No one ever raised a hand to me. No one shouted. That's the part people don't understand. Abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves schedules, labels, explanations that sound reasonable enough to repeat out loud. By the second month, my checkbook was gone. "You misplaced it," she said, already opening her laptop. The retirement account moved next. Then the mail. Bills stopped coming to the house. When I asked, she said she'd switched everything to paperless because it was easier for me. Easier became the reason for everything. In the evenings, I'd sit in the living room while she talked on the phone in the next room. Low voice. Door half closed. I didn't strain to listen. I didn't need to. The tone was enough. Calm. Confident. Like someone explaining a process they'd already mastered. There's a word for this. Most people don't hear it until it's too late. Gaslighting. It doesn't mean lying all the time. It means repeating a version of reality until you start checking with someone else before trusting your own memory. It means being told you're tired when you're not, confused when you're clear, fragile when you're still standing. It works best in families, because families come with permission, permission to step in, permission to decide, permission to say, "I'm doing this for your own good," and be believed. By the third month, I stopped driving, not because I couldn't, but because every time I reached for the keys, she'd pause, just long enough. "Are you sure that's a good idea today?" She never said no. She didn't have to. Doubt does the work faster than force. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the old ceiling fan click with every rotation. The same sound it had made for 20 years. I still knew where everything was in that house. Every loose floorboard, every window that didn't lock unless you lifted it first. I wasn't lost. But the world around me was being rearranged in a way that made me look like I was... The worst part wasn't the loss of money. It was the way other people started talking to me. Slower, louder, like I was underwater, like I wasn't quite there anymore. And once that story takes hold, it spreads on its own. At a barbecue in town, someone asked Melissa how I was doing. She sighed before answering. Some days are better than others. I was standing right there, holding a paper plate. The conversation moved on without me. That's how it happens. Not with violence, with updates, with concern, with people slowly stepping over the line because no one told them where it was. I remember one afternoon in the kitchen. Sun coming through the dusty window. She slid a stack of documents toward me and tapped the top page. "Just a form," she said, "so I can help you if something happens." I looked at the heading. Medical, financial, authority, Big words printed cleanly in black ink. I didn't sign that day. I said I was tired. She nodded. Put the papers away. No argument. That was her style. Pressure without fingerprints. That's when I understood something important. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to erase me, slowly, legally, politely. And the more calm she stayed, the more unstable I looked by comparison. People think gaslighting makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you quiet. And quiet looks like surrender to the wrong audience. By the time I realized how small my world had become, it fit neatly inside someone else's purse. And everyone around us called it care. I didn't go quiet because I was scared. That's the part everyone gets wrong. At the beginning, I fought it, every change, every assumption, every sentence that didn't belong to her. The first time Melissa spoke for me at the doctor's office, I corrected her, calmly. I told the nurse I was fine. I told her I drove myself there. I told her I didn't forget appointments. Melissa smiled and touched my arm. "He's having a good morning," she said. That was the moment I noticed something shift, not in me. In the room, the nurse didn't argue. She just wrote something down. A week later, it happened again. Different place, same pattern. At the bank, I asked a question about my account. Melissa cut in before the clerk could answer. I raised my voice this time, not yelling, just firm. I said, "I can speak for myself." The clerk stopped smiling. Melissa sighed. And suddenly, I was the problem. On the drive home, she told me I'd embarrassed her. She said people were starting to notice my mood swings. That word stuck. Mood swings. I'd never had them before. But once it was said out loud, it didn't need proof. I tried again a few days later. Different tactic. More patient. I asked for the medication list. Asked why the dosage changed. Asked which doctor approved it. I asked politely. Slowly, like I was supposed to. Melissa looked at me the way you look at a dog that doesn't understand a command. Then she said, "This is what I mean." That was the day I learned something important. Every time I pushed back, I made her story stronger. If I argued, I was agitated. If I explained, I was confused. If I insisted, I was unstable. Resistance didn't protect me, it documented me. So I stopped, not all at once, just enough. The next time she answered for me, I let it happen. The next form she filled out, I watched her pen instead of stopping it. The next pill she handed me, I took it without comment and checked the label later. Silence did something arguing never did. It made her comfortable. She stopped watching me as closely. She stopped rehearsing explanations. She assumed the role had settled. That's when I started paying attention to details I'd missed before. Times, dates, names. I noticed she never scheduled appointments on Fridays. I noticed which cabinet she kept the paperwork in. I noticed how quickly she signed my name when she thought I wasn't looking. At night, I sat at the kitchen table while the clock ticked loud enough to count seconds. I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, because I was thinking. People think silence is weakness because they confuse noise with control. They think the loudest person in the room is winning. That's only true if everyone else is reacting. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. Every system breaks the same way. It breaks when it assumes compliance. Melissa started planning out loud, talking through problems she didn't think she needed to hide. She complained about paperwork delays, about how slow things were moving, about how exhausting it was to manage everything on her own. I nodded. I let her talk. There's a moment in every manipulation where the manipulator relaxes, where they stop performing and start revealing. That moment only comes when they believe you've accepted your place. I accepted nothing. I memorized everything. I learned which days she felt rushed, which conversations made her careless, which phrases she used when she needed to sound official. The more I stayed quiet, the more she filled the space. And the more she filled the space, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't 10 years of pretending. It wasn't even close. It was the exact moment I realized resistance was the wrong move. Silence wasn't surrender. It was camouflage. I didn't lose my voice. I stopped wasting it. And while everyone around us believed I was fading, I was doing something much more dangerous. I was letting them think the game was over so I could finally see the board. Ethan showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, right after lunch. I remember because the clock in the kitchen said 1:17, and the heat was sitting heavy on the walls. He didn't knock. Melissa let him in like he belonged there. Ethan Moore, clean shoes, confident walk, the kind of man who looks around before he speaks, not because he's careful, but because he likes to be seen. She introduced him as a consultant, someone helping with paperwork, someone who understood these things. He shook my hand a little too firmly, then spoke slowly. Not to be polite, to test me. I nodded. I always nodded. At first, he spoke English, clear, professional, boring, questions about the land, about maintenance costs, about taxes. Then, standing by the window, he switched languages, Spanish, casual, fast, comfortable. He didn't look at me when he did it. That's how I knew he thought it was safe. People only change languages when they believe the room has divided. Us over here, you over there. He joked with Melissa. Not loud, not secretive either. Just enough to feel private. He talked about timelines, about how long things would take once everything's signed, about how hard it was dealing with someone who doesn't know when to let go. I kept my eyes on the floor, on the dust near my shoes, on the scuffed leather I hadn't polished in weeks. That's the thing about being underestimated. People don't hide from you. They hide around you. Ethan leaned against the counter and laughed. He said something about how clean this would be once it was done. How quiet. He mentioned medication, mentioned how easy it was when doctors wrote things down instead of asking questions. Melissa answered him without switching back to English. She was relaxed now. Shoulders down, voice steady. They spoke like planners, not criminals. That's when it clicked. When people believe you can't understand them, they stop performing. They stop choosing words carefully. They start telling the truth by accident. I'd seen this before, decades ago. Different setting. Back then, it was boardrooms. Men speaking freely because they assumed the old guy at the table was out of the loop. They talked about margins, about cutting people loose, about deals that were already done. They never noticed the silence. They only noticed the noise they were making. Ethan was the same. He liked the sound of his own certainty. He explained things that didn't need explaining. He filled gaps no one asked him to fill. That's how manipulation leaks, not through force, through excess. He walked me through a future I hadn't agreed to yet. Talked about selling portions of the land. Talked about moving me somewhere safer. Safer. He said that word like it was generous. I didn't look up, didn't interrupt, didn't react. Silence makes people nervous only when they're unsure. Ethan wasn't unsure. He assumed I was already gone. At one point, he said something that made Melissa laugh. A short laugh, sharp. Then she covered her mouth and glanced at me. I looked confused on purpose, tilted my head, blinked once. Her shoulders relaxed again. That was the pattern. Every time I played the role, they leaned in closer. They talked about signatures, about witnesses, about how long it would take before everything was final. Final is a word people use when they think nothing can stop them. Ethan checked his phone. He said they were ahead of schedule. Ahead of what, exactly? He didn't say, he didn't need to. The conversation drifted, from plans to complaints, from strategy to irritation. He complained about how slow banks were, how annoying it was dealing with sentimental old men. He didn't realize he'd said that last part out loud. Not in English. I noticed how often he used we, how rarely he said my name. That told me everything. When he left, he clapped me on the shoulder. Too hard, too friendly. "Good to meet you," he said. Back in English, I smiled, the kind of smile people expect from someone they've already dismissed. The door closed behind him. The house went quiet. I sat there for a long time after, long enough for the clock to move from 2:03 to 2:19. I replayed every sentence, every assumption, every loose end he thought didn't matter. That's when I understood something simple and dangerous. People who think they're smarter than you always talk more than they should. They don't realize they're leaving fingerprints on every word. Ethan didn't beat me that afternoon. He handed me a map. And for the first time since all of this started, I knew exactly where the trap was being built. They thought the room belonged to them. They thought the language protected them. What they didn't know was that the more they talked, the more certain I became that this was no longer about money. This was about erasing me. And now, finally, I knew how they planned to do it. I met Thomas Reed on a Thursday morning, just after sunrise. His office was above a hardware store. Second floor, no elevator. I counted the steps on the way up, 18. He didn't rush me, didn't finish my sentences, didn't look at Melissa when she spoke for me, because she wasn't there. I slid a thin folder across his desk. Not dramatic, not thick, just enough to start a question. He opened it slowly, read the first page, then the second. "What are you asking me?" he said. I told him I wanted to know what had already been decided without me, not what might happen, what was already moving. Thomas nodded once, then he asked for everything. That night, after Melissa fell asleep, I went down to the basement. The light flickered when I pulled the chain, same as it always had. I moved the old tool chest away from the wall and reached behind it, where the outlet sat loose. The cameras were old, installed years ago after a break-in that never happened. Black and white. No sound. Still running. I copied the footage onto a drive the size of my thumb. Dates mattered. Times mattered more. Next came the medicine cabinet. I laid the bottles out on the counter, one by one, like evidence. Took photos, checked labels, compared dosages to the prescriptions on file. 2 of them didn't match. I didn't stop taking them. I just stopped swallowing them. At the clinic, I requested my records. Not aggressively, not urgently. I said I was organizing paperwork. The clerk printed everything without looking up. I noticed what wasn't there. Appointments I'd never attended. Notes I'd never heard. Concerns I'd never voiced. Someone else had been speaking in my name. The bank statements came next. Then the retirement account. Transfers marked routine. Signatures placed where my hand had never been. I didn't confront anyone. I documented. Every evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen that scratched too loudly. I wrote down times, conversations, who said what, and where they were standing when they said it. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, the wind dragged against the fence like it was trying to get in. Melissa didn't notice. She thought my silence meant acceptance. Thomas did. We met twice a week. Same chair, same desk. He never gave advice unless I asked. He just laid things out in order. Medical authority, financial authority, intent. "None of this is accidental," he said once, tapping the page. "It's coordinated." I watched his pen pause over a sentence I hadn't seen before. He looked up. They assumed you wouldn't read. Most people don't read the fine print because they trust the person handing them the paper. That's the weakness. Not age, not memory. Trust. I started reading everything, slowly. Out loud sometimes, not because I needed to, but because it made the words stick. One afternoon, I noticed a date that didn't line up. A form filed before a doctor's visit that justified it. Another document referenced a diagnosis that hadn't been made yet. The order was wrong. Thomas smiled. Just slightly. Order matters, he said. At home. Melissa grew impatient. She asked if I'd signed anything yet. She asked if I remembered our conversation. I told her I was tired. She stopped asking after that. The more paperwork I gathered, the less she pushed. She thought the delay was me fading. She didn't realize it was me measuring. By the third week, the folder was thick enough to make a sound when it hit the desk. Video, records, timelines, nothing illegal on my part. Everything questionable on theirs. Thomas leaned back and folded his hands. This isn't about proving they're bad people, he said. It's about showing intent in daylight. Daylight. That word stayed with me. The ranch cameras caught more than movement. They caught patterns. Who entered rooms, who lingered, who spoke to whom when they thought no one was watching. The medicine logs showed adjustments that weren't approved. The financial trail showed preparation, not theft, removal. They weren't stealing yet. They were clearing space. That's when I understood the danger wasn't immediate. It was scheduled, and schedules can be interrupted. I stopped feeling angry around then. Not because I forgave anything, because anger wastes focus. Strategy doesn't. Every piece fit. Not quickly. Precisely. Thomas closed the folder and slid it back to me. "You're ready," he said. I asked him, ready for what? He didn't answer right away. Ready to stop being the quiet one in the room. He said finally, and start being the only one who read the instructions. I walked back down the 18 steps, slower than before. The sun was higher now. The parking lot was empty. Inside my jacket pocket, the drive felt heavier than it should have. At the ranch, Melissa was on the phone when I came in, speaking softly, confidently. I hung my jacket by the door, sat down, waited. The papers were no longer just paper. They were leverage, and for the first time, I wasn't reacting to what they were doing. I was deciding when to let them know they'd already been caught. Saturday, 10:12, Mom. Thomas Reed texted me one line. Today, 1 hour. Don't be late. I shaved slower than usual, not because my hands shook, because timing is a kind of respect. The ranch was quiet when we left. The wind pushed dust across the driveway like it was sweeping the place clean. Melissa drove. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, smiling at nothing. I sat in the back with my cane across my knees. The brace under my pants pulled tight when I shifted. Melissa reached back once and patted my arm like you do a dog that might bite. Just relax, she said. Let the adults handle it. She said it for Ethan, not for me. We pulled into a low building off the highway. Beige stucco, a faded flag, a sign that read County Land Services. Next door was a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and frying oil. This wasn't a family argument. This was paperwork. And paperwork is where people like them feel safest. Inside. The air was cold. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, a water cooler humming in the corner. The kind of place where lives get changed without anyone raising their voice. Thomas was already there, standing near the back wall, hands in his pockets, calm, clean suit, no smile. He looked at me the way you look at a locked door you finally found the key to. At the long table sat 3 strangers, a land appraiser with a laptop and a measuring tape clipped to his belt, a notary public with a stamp the size of a fist, and a local banker in a gray tie who kept checking his watch, witnesses, neutral faces, hard eyes. Melissa's posture changed the second she saw them. Shoulders back, chin lifted. She became the version of herself she practiced in mirrors. Ethan shook hands like he was closing a deal on a yacht. He spoke too loudly. He laughed too easily. Then Melissa turned to the table and said, "My husband isn't really all here today, so I'll be signing on his behalf." She didn't ask permission. She announced ownership. The banker glanced at me, not long, just enough to register the cane, the brace, the slow blink. The notary slid a stack of documents across the table. Power of attorney, medical directives, authorization to sell, authorization to move funds, 4 signatures, 2 initials, and 1 place for a thumbprint. Melissa picked up the pen, like she had been waiting her whole life for it. I watched Thomas. He didn't move, he didn't interrupt. That's the thing people don't understand about justice. They think it lives in arguments. They think if you explain the truth clearly enough, the liar will stop lying. That's a fantasy. In a house, behind closed doors, the loudest person wins. In a marriage, in a kitchen, in a bedroom, the manipulator thrives. Because there are no rules in private, only pressure. But this wasn't private. This was a room built for records. A room built for accountability, out in the open. "It isn't," he said. She said, "It's show me." Melissa leaned toward me, voice soft, sweet enough to rot teeth. "Walter," she said, "just do what Thomas says. We'll go home right after." Thomas finally spoke. Not to Melissa, to the notary. "Before we proceed," he said, "I need a minute on the record." The notary looked up, annoyed. Thomas placed a slim drive on the table. Black plastic, no label. He didn't slide it toward them like a weapon. He set it down like a fact. "I also need to attach supporting documentation," he said, "to protect the client." Melissa blinked. Just once, but her fingers tightened around the pen. Ethan shifted in his chair. The first crack. "What documentation?" Melissa asked. "Too fast." Thomas opened a folder. Thick, tabbed, organized, color-coded in a way that made it look boring. Boring is dangerous. He laid out 3 pages first. Medical records. He said, "Original copies, requested directly. No intermediaries." Melissa laughed. Just a small sound. "That's fine," she said. "I manage his care." Thomas didn't react to the laugh. "Here are the medication logs," he continued, tapping a highlighted section. Dosage changes that were never approved by the prescribing physician. The appraiser glanced up from his laptop. The banker stopped checking his watch. Melissa's smile stayed in place, but her eyes moved. Ethan leaned back, still pretending. He looked at me like I was furniture. Thomas turned 1 page. "Here are the financial transfers," he said. "Marked as routine, scheduled, repeated, all initiated from the same device." Melissa's voice hardened. "That's ridiculous." Thomas nodded once, like he expected that sentence. "Here are the timestamps," he said. "And here is the ranch security footage." That word landed. Footage. Melissa's head snapped toward him. Ethan's jaw tightened like he was biting down on panic. "Your Honor," Ethan started, then caught himself. This wasn't court, but his fear didn't know the difference. The notary shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if there's an allegation of coercion, it's not an allegation," Thomas said. "It's a record." He looked at me then, just for a second. A question without words. Are you ready to let them see the light? I didn't nod. I didn't need to. I placed my hand on the table, palm down, slow, steady. Melissa reached for my wrist like she always did, to guide me, to control the moment. Thomas's voice cut through. "Do not touch him," he said. Not loud, not angry, just final. The room went still. Melissa froze mid-reach, like a child caught stealing. Ethan's sunglasses suddenly felt stupid in fluorescent light. He took them off. The banker cleared his throat. "Mr. Grayson, are you stating you do not consent to this authorization?" That was the first time anyone asked me a direct question in months. Not Melissa, not the doctors, not the nurses, a stranger, in a neutral room, in daylight, and that's why the stage matters, because in private, they can call it love, they can call it care, they can call it concern, but in public, in front of paper and witnesses, it becomes what it is, control. Thomas slid the thumbprint pad closer to me. "If you're able," he said, "I'd like you to confirm your identity and your intent." Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper that wasn't meant to be kind. "Walter, don't do this." Ethan leaned in, trying a different angle, soft tone, reasonable face. "Let's not make a scene," he said. "We can talk at home." Home. That word almost made me smile, because that's where they were strongest. Behind doors, behind curtains, behind a story they controlled. But this wasn't home. This was a room with a stamp, a room with a record, a room where lies don't survive long. I pressed my thumb down, left the print, lifted it clean. The notary watched closely. The banker wrote something down. Thomas closed the folder and looked straight at Melissa. "This meeting is paused," he said. "And if anyone here continues without Mr. Grayson's clear consent, you're not just risking a civil dispute, you're stepping into something criminal." Melissa's face flushed. Not tears, not guilt. Rage, because the thing she hated wasn't that she was losing money. It was that she was losing the shadows. And now, in a room full of witnesses, she couldn't drag me back into the dark without everyone seeing her do it. The room didn't explode after that. That's what surprised them. No shouting. No tears. Just a long pause where everyone waited for someone else to speak. Melissa broke first. She laughed, sharp and short, and said, "This is ridiculous." She turned to Ethan like he could fix it. He didn't look back. The banker cleared his throat again. The appraiser pretended to check his screen. The notary watched my hands. I pushed the chair back and stood up. Slowly, carefully. The cane slid off my knees and hit the floor with a hollow sound. I didn't reach for it. That sound changed the room. Melissa's eyes dropped to my legs, then back to my face. I took one step forward, then another. No wobble, no hesitation. Ethan leaned forward. "Wait," he said. "You said I looked at him for the first time since we walked in. And I spoke to him in Spanish, not loudly, not angrily, fluent, clean, familiar. The words landed hard because they came from the place he thought was empty. His mouth opened, closed. He glanced at Melissa like she'd missed something important. I kept speaking. I told him I'd understood every conversation, every joke, every plan made behind my back because they thought language was a wall." Melissa's face drained of color. "You don't," she started. I switched to English without warning. "I do," I said, "and I always have." Silence settled again, heavier this time. Thomas didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. I turned to the banker. "You asked me earlier if I consented. I said, I don't. Clear, simple. On the record." Then I turned to the notary. And before you stamp anything else, I said, there's one more document you should know about. Thomas slid a single page across the table. Not thick, not dramatic. A deed. The banker leaned in first, his eyebrows pulled together as he read. What is this? Melissa asked. Thomas answered her. Not me. A transfer, he said, filed 6 weeks ago. Melissa's breath caught. Transferred to who Thomas didn't look at her when he spoke. A conservation trust, he said. Veterans Land Preservation. Non-profit. Irrevocable. Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. That's not possible, he said. That land, Thomas interrupted, is no longer available for sale. Not now, not ever. Melissa stared at the page like it might change if she looked long enough. That's the most valuable parcel, she whispered. I nodded once. The ridgeline, the water access, the part they circled on every map. Gone. Not hidden. Not stolen. Protected. Ethan's voice rose. You can't just give it away. I didn't. I said. I gave it back. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. That land was never meant to be flipped. I continued. It was meant to stay. Melissa's hands shook now. She tried to hide it by folding them together. You did this to hurt us, she said. I shook my head. No, I said. I did this so you couldn't hurt anyone else with it. That was the difference. Revenge wants pain. Principle wants limits. Thomas stood and addressed the room. Given the evidence presented, he said, this meeting is concluded. Any further attempts to act on Mr. Grayson's assets without his explicit consent will be documented and pursued. The banker nodded. The notary closed her book. Process resumed. Just not in their favor. Melissa turned on me then. No mask left. You planned this, she said. You let me think, I let you think what you wanted. I said, that's not the same thing. Ethan backed away from the table. His confidence collapsed in real time. He looked smaller without his language trick, without his assumptions. This isn't over, he said. I met his eyes. It is. I said, you just didn't know when. No one followed them when they left. The door closed softly behind them. No slam, no drama, just the sound of something ending without permission to restart. Thomas packed his files. The appraiser shut his laptop. The banker shook my hand, firmer this time. Respect changes grip. When the room emptied, I sat back down. The cane lay where it had fallen. I didn't pick it up right away. Thomas waited. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't lightheaded. I was clear this wasn't about winning. It was about stopping something that had already gone too far. They thought the final move would be loud, explosive. They thought it would look like anger. They were wrong. The last move is always quiet. It looks like paperwork. It sounds like a stamp. And it works not because it hurts them, but because it leaves them with nowhere left to stand. If you're still watching this, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. Not as a character, not as a story, as a person who has been there. If you've ever been called confused, if someone has said, let me handle it, before you even finished your sentence, if decisions about your life started happening in rooms you weren't invited into, I know what that feels like. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives politely. Someone takes the keys because it's easier. Someone answers questions for you because you're tired. Someone tells you not to worry, not to think, not to stress. And slowly, your world gets smaller, not because you're weak, but because someone else keeps rearranging the furniture around you until there's nowhere left to stand. They call it care. They call it love. But real care doesn't shrink you. If you've been made to feel like a burden for asking questions, If you've been treated like a problem for wanting clarity, if silence was the only way to keep the peace, you're not imagining it. There is a difference between help and control. Help asks. Control decides. A lot of people think silence means defeat. It doesn't. Silence can be exhaustion. It can be grief. It can be strategy. Sometimes silence is the only way to stay intact when every word you say gets twisted into proof that you can't be trusted with your own life. I didn't stop talking because I forgot how. I stopped because every explanation became ammunition. And I know many of you are there right now, sitting in rooms where people talk over you, nodding because correcting them would only make things worse, letting things go because the cost of pushing back feels too high. That doesn't make you weak. It means you're surviving the only way you know how. But hear this clearly. Silence only has power when it is your choice. If someone has taken your voice and labeled it concern, that's not peace. That's control wearing a soft face. You don't need to stand up today. You don't need to confront anyone tonight. You don't need to prove anything to anyone watching you closely, waiting for a mistake. What you need is to remember something simple. You are still you. Your memory didn't disappear because someone said it did. Your judgment didn't expire because you got older. Your life is not a committee decision. There are people who underestimate quiet because they confuse it with emptiness. They are wrong. Quiet people notice patterns. They remember dates. They connect dots. Quiet people don't rush. They wait. And waiting is not the same as surrender. If this story hit something in you, it's because you recognized the feeling before the details. The moment when someone crossed a line and then told you it was for your own good. You don't owe anyone constant reassurance that you're still capable. You don't owe anyone obedience just because they say they care. Respect is not loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in small things, in being asked instead of told, in being included instead of managed, in being heard even when the answer is inconvenient. If you are being treated like you've already disappeared, I want you to know this. You haven't. And when you decide to speak again, if you decide to speak again, do it for yourself, not to convince anyone else, because the most dangerous moment for someone who underestimates you is the moment they realize your silence was never confusion. It was awareness. And awareness, once it has time to gather itself, doesn't need to shout. It only needs the right moment. And that moment doesn't come because someone gives you permission. It comes when you remember you never lost it in the first place. Rachel came to see me 2 days later, late afternoon. The light was low, cutting across the kitchen floor the way it always had. She stood by the door at first, didn't sit, didn't speak. I poured coffee for both of us, the old mugs, the chipped ones. She watched my hands. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't know how." I said, "That was the truth, not the whole one, but the honest part." She sat down slowly, like the chair might move if she trusted it too fast. "I thought you were slipping," she said. "They told me I know what they told you." I said. I didn't interrupt her again after that. I let her talk. Let the words come out tangled. Let the guilt find its way to the surface without pushing it. She cried once, quietly. No sound, just her shoulders tightening. I slid the napkin across the table. Same motion I'd done since she was 10. Some things don't need words. We didn't go over details. We didn't name names. This wasn't a trial, it was a repair. I should have asked you directly, she said. I nodded. Yes, I said. You should have. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was checking if I was still there. I won't make that mistake again, she said. I believed her. That was enough. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like quiet alignment. things returning to where they were supposed to be. I didn't celebrate what happened. I didn't replay it. What mattered was what didn't happen next. No more papers slid across the table without my name on them. No more decisions made for my own good. The house felt larger again. Not because the walls moved, because I did. People think justice is loud, that it announces itself with raised voices and slammed doors. It doesn't. Real justice is procedural. It shows up on time. It brings receipts. It doesn't need to humiliate anyone. It only needs to stop the harm. I didn't win because I was clever. I didn't win because I outsmarted anyone. I won because I prepared. That's the part no one wants to hear. They want a moment, a line, a speech. But justice doesn't care how angry you are. It only cares how ready you are. Ready with facts. Ready with timelines. Ready with restraint. Begging never convinces systems. Preparation does. I see a lot of people exhaust themselves arguing with the wrong audience, trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding them. That's a losing strategy. If someone needs you confused to stay in control, clarity is already a threat, and clarity doesn't come from shouting. It comes from patience, from documentation, from choosing the right room to speak in. I didn't confront anyone in the kitchen. I didn't plead in the living room. I waited for the table where truth is measured, not debated. That's the difference between reaction and resolution. Rachel comes by every Sunday now. We don't talk about what happened unless she asks. She usually doesn't. She asks about the land, the fence, the repairs that still need doing, normal questions. That's what justice looks like when it works. Life continuing without someone tightening the screws behind your back. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Don't confuse silence with weakness, and don't confuse noise with power. Power is quiet when it's legitimate. It doesn't rush. It doesn't threaten. It waits until the moment is correct. And when it moves, it doesn't ask for permission. So if you're waiting for justice to feel dramatic, you might miss it. Because when it finally arrives, it often looks like paperwork being honored, boundaries being respected, and people who once controlled everything suddenly having nothing left to say. That's not revenge. That's order being restored. And it doesn't need applause. It just needs to be accurate. If you're still here with me, I want you to do something simple. Think about the last time someone said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." And you felt yourself get smaller. Not because they yelled, not because they hit you, because they decided. They chose your words for you. They chose your medication. They chose your money. They chose your future. And you stayed quiet because arguing only made you look unstable. If that sounds familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. Silence can be a shield, but it has to be yours. If you're quiet right now because you're collecting yourself, collecting proof, collecting your next step, that's not weakness, that's discipline. And if you're quiet because you feel trapped, because you don't know where to start, because you're afraid no one will believe you, you're not alone, not even close. So here's what I'd like you to do. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who claimed they loved you? Where are you watching from? And if you know someone who's being taken care of in a way that looks kind on the outside, but feels like control on the inside, send them this video. Not as drama, as a reminder. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can hear is, "You're not crazy, you're not helpless, you're not done." And if this story hit you in the chest, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel because these stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings.